The neon lights buzzed softly as the dust settled over the quiet town. Terrence pulled his old, beaten-up truck into the lot of Marlowe's Pub, a modest, no-frills bar just outside of town. It wasn't the kind of place that stood out, just a solid spot where locals could unwind. Truck drivers, bar regulars, and travelers looking for a quiet evening were the usual patrons. Terrence, fresh from a long deployment, had returned home just a week ago, and all he wanted was to decompress in solitude before stepping back into the whirlwind of daily life. The bar's door creaked open as Terrence stepped inside. The familiar hum of a jukebox playing classic country songs greeted him, along with the sounds of conversation, laughter, and clinking glasses. He scanned the room, taking in the regulars, a group hunched over a pool table, some loners nursing beers, and a few folks chatting at the bar. It was nothing extraordinary, but that was exactly what he needed tonight. A simple, peaceful evening. Terrence found a corner booth, tucked away just enough to be unnoticed, but with a good view of the room. His uniform blended into the dim lighting, though the sneakers on his feet stood out, comfort over style as always. He ordered a water, not feeling like anything stronger tonight. The memories of home, his mother's cooking, and the excited chatter of his niece occupied his thoughts. But just as he started to lose himself in these warm recollections, the door slammed open, breaking his reverie. A group of 6 men entered, boots thumping heavily against the floor. They were older, each wearing a worn leather jacket with its various patches and insignias, definitely veterans. They made their way toward the bar, loud and boisterous, laughing, patting each other on the back, and exchanging stories. Terrence gave them a passing glance before returning to his drink, but the leader of the group, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, seemed to take special notice of him. His gaze lingered on Terrence, and the laughter among the group died down slightly. The man muttered something to his friends, who turned their attention toward Terrence as well. The sudden shift in atmosphere was palpable. The noise in the bar faded, replaced by an uncomfortable tension. Terrence could feel the weight of their stares, but he didn't let it bother him. He'd been through enough over the years to not let people's judgment rattle him. He sipped his water, trying to focus on the jukebox in the corner. Still, there was no ignoring the group as they gathered around the bar, speaking in low voices, occasionally glancing in his direction. The tension grew thicker as the men made their way toward his table. The leader, walking at the front, was the first to stop in front of him. His eyes locked on Terrence's, and there was a sneer on his face. "Nice uniform," he barked. "Where'd you get it? Halloween store?" The group behind him laughed, loud, mocking laughs. Terrence didn't flinch. His eyes stayed steady as he looked up. "It's mine," he replied simply. "Earned it." The leader raised an eyebrow. "Earned it? That's funny. I've seen plenty of real soldiers, and none of them wear sneakers with their fatigues. You trying to play dress up for sympathy, or maybe a free drink?" The insult stung, but Terrence stayed calm. "I don't need sympathy or free drinks," he replied evenly. "I'm just here to enjoy my evening." The leader leaned in closer, invading Terrence's space. "You don't look like a soldier to me," he sneered. "Where are your boots, your tags? Hell, you probably don't even know how to salute properly." Another member of the group chimed in. "Bet he couldn't tell us the first thing about basic training." The laughter that followed was cruel, loud, and unwelcome. Terrence remained silent, choosing not to engage. He wasn't going to let these men provoke him, but his patience was wearing thin. The disrespect, the ignorance, it was infuriating, but he had learned over the years to keep his cool in moments like these. The confrontation wasn't about him proving anything to them. It was about holding his ground and maintaining dignity. "I don't need to prove anything to you," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. The leader, now visibly irritated, stepped even closer, towering over the table. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Walking in here like you belong? I don't think you do." Terrence met his gaze, unflinching. "I've served 3 tours overseas," he said, "and I don't need your approval to belong anywhere." For a moment, the room went quiet. The leader paused, his bravado faltering. But pride was a dangerous thing, and he scoffed before speaking again. "Prove it. Show us your tags. Otherwise, you're nothing but a liar." Terrence's eyes flicked to the others in the group, who were now shifting uncomfortably. Their leader had overstepped, and it was clear they weren't sure how to back him up. But none of them spoke up. "I don't owe you proof," Terrence said coolly. "But if you think starting something here is a good idea, I'd suggest you think again." The tension in the room was electric. the kind of silence that only comes just before a fight. The bartender had his hand near the phone, ready to call for help if needed. Terrence could feel the room watching, but he wasn't about to back down. The leader, however, wasn't done. "You've got a smart mouth," the man sneered. "Let's see if it's as quick as your fists." The challenge was clear, and in a split second, the leader lunged forward, trying to grab Terrence's collar. But his movement was sloppy, driven by rage rather than any real skill. Terrence's training kicked in. With a swift sidestep, he avoided the grab, catching the man's wrist midair. In one fluid motion, he twisted the man's arm behind his back and used his weight to push him forward, slamming him face first into the edge of the table. The man let out a strangled yelp of pain. The room was silent for a moment, stunned. The rest of the group stood frozen, watching their leader struggle. Terrence's voice broke the silence. "I told you to think twice before starting something." He leaned in slightly, his grip tight but controlled. "You don't know who you're messing with." The leader struggled against him, but it was clear that Terrence had the situation under control. The group's bravado quickly evaporated. One of them, a younger man, stepped forward hesitantly, raising his hands in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. "Hey man, let him go. He didn't mean nothing by it." Terrence's gaze was unwavering. "He came at me first," he said calmly. "If you want him free, tell him to calm down." The bartender, still standing by with his hand on the phone, spoke up. "Maybe it's time you all leave before this gets worse." But Hank, his name was Hank, as one of his friends called him, wasn't ready to let it go. His pride was bruised, and even with his arm twisted painfully behind his back, he hissed through gritted teeth. "Call the cops! This guy assaulted me. He's wearing a fake uniform, and I want him arrested." Terrence released him, pushing Hank back slightly. The man stumbled forward, clutching his wrist in pain, but his glare at Terrence was full of malice. "You'll pay for this," he growled. One of the other bikers pulled out a phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. "Yeah, we've got a guy here impersonating a soldier," he said loudly, enough for everyone in the bar to hear. "He just assaulted my friend." Terrence stood still, his expression calm, despite the chaos unfolding around him. He knew exactly how this looked, how quickly things could spiral out of control. But he was confident that he hadn't done anything wrong. His years of service, his sacrifices, they would stand up against these accusations. He just had to keep his composure. The murmurs among the other patrons grew louder, some casting sidelong glances at Terrence, others whispering among themselves. A few seemed impressed by how easily he had handled the situation, but no one dared to step forward and challenge what had happened. Outside, the sound of approaching sirens sliced through the tension in the air. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, casting erratic shadows across the room. The police had arrived. The bar fell silent as two police officers entered. The first was a tall man with a broad build, his features unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. The second was a woman, her calm, sharp features scanning the room with a steady gaze. Their presence immediately commanded attention, and all eyes turned to them. "We got a call about an altercation," the male officer announced, his voice firm and controlled. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" Hank, still clutching his wrist, was the first to speak. His voice trembled slightly as he pointed an accusing finger at Terrence. "That guy assaulted me," he spat, his voice thick with anger. "He's impersonating a soldier. Look at him. He doesn't even have proper boots on." The officer's gaze shifted to Terrence, who stood quietly, his posture relaxed but alert. "Is that true?" the officer asked, his tone neutral. Terrence didn't hesitate. He met the officer's gaze with calm confidence. "No, sir. This man and his friends confronted me because they didn't believe I'm a real soldier. When he tried to grab me, I defended myself." The female officer stepped forward, her eyes sweeping the room. "Did anyone witness what happened?" she asked, her voice carrying an air of authority that silenced the bar. The bartender, still standing near the phone, spoke up. "I saw it," he said, his voice clear. "Hank went after him first. The soldier just reacted to protect himself. It wasn't assault." A few patrons who had been quietly watching the scene nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Hank's been on edge ever since he walked in," one of them added. "It wasn't the soldier's fault." The male officer turned back to Terrence. "Do you have any proof of your service, sir?" he asked, his tone still neutral, but now tinged with a hint of respect. Terrence nodded, his movements deliberate as he gestured to a duffel bag sitting by his table. In that bag, I've got my service uniform with my name and rank. I also have my ID in my wallet. You're welcome to take a look. The officer retrieved the bag and opened it carefully, pulling out a neatly folded uniform with patches and badges. He examined it briefly before looking back at his partner, who gave a slight nod. She didn't need to say anything. It was clear from her expression that Terrence's story was holding up. "You're clear," the male officer said, his voice firm but respectful. "We appreciate your cooperation." Hank, who had been simmering with anger the entire time, scoffed and shook his head. "You're just going to take his word for it?" he sneered. "He could have faked all that." The female officer shot Hank a sharp look. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "From what I've heard, you instigated this, and you're lucky he's not pressing charges against you for assault." The words hit Hank like a slap to the face. His bravado faltered, and his shoulders slumped slightly. The other bikers, sensing the change in the air, shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. The male officer wasn't done yet. "Here's how this is going to go," he continued, his voice calm but authoritative. "We're filing a report about this incident. If you want to pursue your claims, you're welcome to do so, but you should know that false accusations are a serious matter." Hank opened his mouth, no doubt to argue, but then closed it again, realizing he had nothing left to stand on. The officers stood there, scanning the room one last time, ensuring that the tension had dissipated. The female officer turned back to Terrence. "Thank you for keeping your cool," she said, her tone softening slightly. "We'll make sure this is documented correctly." Terrence gave a small nod, his composure unshaken. "Thank you, officer." With that, the officers made their way out of the bar, leaving behind a group of bikers who were now deflated and awkward. Hank, still burning with anger, shot one last glare at Terrence before heading out the door. The other bikers, no longer eager to be associated with the confrontation, quickly followed. The bar, once again, fell back into its usual rhythm. The sound of glasses clinking and quiet conversation filled the air. Terrence sat back down at his table, his drink still untouched, the weight of the altercation lingering. But he felt a quiet sense of relief. It hadn't escalated further. Around him, the other patrons whispered among themselves, casting occasional glances in his direction. The wary tension that had hung in the air earlier had now shifted to a quiet respect. Terrence didn't seek out recognition, but he could feel the subtle change in how people saw him. A few days later, Terrence was in his driveway, working on his old pickup truck. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. He was tightening a bolt under the hood, his mind still preoccupied with the incident at the bar. It wasn't the confrontation itself that weighed on him. It was the reminder of how often people judged him without understanding who he truly was or what he had been through. The quiet rumble of a motorcycle engine broke his thoughts. Terrence stood up, wiping his hands on a rag, and turned to see a familiar figure rolling into his driveway. It was Bill, one of the bikers from the bar. Bill cut the engine and dismounted, looking more nervous than Terrence had ever seen him. His leather jacket looked too big, and he seemed to hesitate for a moment before approaching. "Hey," Bill said, his voice quiet. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Terrence gave a small nod, though he didn't speak. He was curious, but not ready to let his guard down. Bill cleared his throat and stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets. I wanted to come by and say I'm sorry for what happened at the bar." Terrence raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You were part of it," he said evenly. Bill looked down, guilt written all over his face. "I know. I didn't stop it when I should have. Hank, he's got a way of riling people up, and I went along with it, but that doesn't make it right." Bill met Terrence's eyes. "I've been thinking about it ever since, and I just wanted to tell you that." For a long moment, Terrence didn't speak. He studied Bill, looking for any signs of insincerity. But the man's discomfort was obvious, as was his genuine remorse. "Why now?" Terrence finally asked, his tone steady. Bill shrugged, his gaze shifting downward. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because, well, seeing you handle yourself the way you did, it made me realize how wrong we were. You didn't deserve any of that." Terrence let the words hang in the air, weighing them carefully. He had heard apologies before, some genuine and some hollow. But Bill's apology was different. Not because of what he said, but because he was here, showing up, trying to make things right. "I appreciate you coming here," Terrence said after a long pause. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it's a start." Bill nodded, relief flooding his face. "Thanks, man. I mean it." As Bill mounted his motorcycle and started the engine, Terrence watched him go. The tension from the bar had long since faded, but the memory of it lingered. It was a reminder of the ignorance and prejudice still alive in the world. But it was also a reminder that change was possible, even if it came slowly. Terrence returned to his truck, wiping his hands again as he reflected on everything that had happened. The fight against ignorance wasn't over, but he wasn't alone in it. He knew that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought overseas, but right here, in the places and moments that truly tested who people were. The evening air was calm as he finished his work, the sound of cicadas humming softly in the background. Terrence felt a sense of resolve, not just to keep moving forward, but to face whatever came next with the same strength and integrity that had carried him through his service. He knew that, in the end, it was the quiet battles that mattered just as much.